Hi, Lisa. This is MSDEOIT. Can you hear me? Yeah.
Oh, okay. So we can wait till another minute.
Hi, Matt. This is MSDEOIT. Can you hear me?
Yep, I've got you.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
Everyone got a little tester.
So.
Yeah,
Red light means you're going. All right. Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to our August CTE committee meeting. I want to start by thanking Dr. Wright and her team for hosting us here at the State Department of Education. We had a wonderful lunch and learn before with Richard Kincaid from Dr. Wright's team. Really helpful for all of us. I think I can speak for everyone. You guys have been great hosts. Thank you for feeding us and feeding us a lot of really helpful information and context for this work. So before we launch in to our agenda, Molly, could I ask you to do roll call for us, make sure we have a quorum?
Absolutely. The members we have present virtually are Matt Holloway, and then in person we have Sharnetta Young, Brian Cavey, Dr. Wright, Chair Myra Norton, Secretary Portia Wu, and Rob Limpert. And we do expect, I think, a few other members to possibly attend just a few minutes late, so I will sort of update the meeting minutes to reflect that.
Great. Thank you, Molly. All right, let's start with the maybe not as exciting stuff. We have two sets of minutes to approve. Members were provided a copy in advance of this meeting. There's also one in the printed packet that you have in front of you. So I'd like to make a motion that we approve the minutes from both the May 22nd and June 26th meetings. Any discussion, concern? Great. I have a second from Secretary Wu. All in favor? Aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Fabulous. Done. Okay. I wanted to start this meeting with a kind of a discussion of a couple of strategic priorities that we've talked about in terms of next steps for this committee. As you know, we've done a ton of work. We approved the IRC policy. We're going to be talking today about the definition policy for what is a high school level of a registered apprenticeship. We're moving forward on a number of these activities and deliverables that we have as a committee. And one of the pieces that we're working on right now is both what the CTE framework that we're responsible for building for the state and the implementation plan for this year. And in that work, in conversations with all kinds of stakeholders, not just committee members, it has occurred to me there are sort of two real important strategic issues that we need to understand more deeply. The first is what the strategy is going to be for employer recruitment. So as I've been in conversations with, and all of us, isn't just me, but as many of us have been in conversations with LEAs in the work group that I chair for the 2030 Commission that's focused on identifying barriers for high school students to participate in apprenticeships. A lot of those, we're having those conversations sort of hypothetically or in theory right now, because the barriers really become apparent when you start getting specific about what are the jobs, what are the apprenticeships, how are we going to get to 60,000 apprenticeships in 2030, and not just what industries are they going to come from, but what jobs are they going to be, and what then are the what do employers need apprenticeships to look like in those jobs, and how do they need schools to partner with them on that. It's really hard to address the barriers when you actually don't know all of them yet. So in a lot of the work, we can identify some sort of across the board recommendations, and that's a big part of what the 2030 Commission is doing for things that we can address that we know are going to have wide applicability. But most of it is going to be driven by what that employer demand is. And so we actually talked about this in the executive committee of the Governor's Workforce Development Board, and Secretary Wu has graciously agreed to have her team, she and her team, present at the September 18th meeting of the Governor's Workforce Development Board on the strategy. What is the strategy? How are they thinking about how we're going to get to that level of answers that we need to really start to put some of these other pieces in motion? Does that make sense to everybody? And one of the things I wanted to ask this group is, I think that conversation on September 18th is going to be really important. Are there certain questions that you all have, things that we want to make sure that the team is incorporating in that conversation? Anything come to mind? I have several, but.
I'm happy to chime in at the right point, but
Go ahead.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and we're looking forward to that presentation. Just to echo your remarks, I think it would be helpful for us to hear, and if it's not here, message us. Rachel and I offline will connect with Chris McLaren, our head of apprenticeship, about what would be useful for you in that discussion. Obviously, particularly for the CTE committee, and it's very fitting we're here at MSDE, thinking about how do we integrate, how are we working with schools and LEAs, and whatever questions you have or information you have to bring to bear that you want to use to structure that. I think that's, we'd love to fold that in. And to underscore the comments that the chair made earlier, I mean, apprenticeship is, there are many different kinds of earn and learn experiences or work-based learning, but apprenticeship by definition incorporates a job. And so that is why the engagement with employers does need to be very deep, and it can take quite a long time because an employer has to feel comfortable and have jobs available where they can be working with the apprentice, in this case the high school level apprentice, to incorporate them into their workflow and into their daily business needs. And so that's why the outreach to businesses is very important, and we really welcome feedback as we try to chart a new course here.
Thank you. I think the second sort of big strategic issue that's at least on my mind, and I've heard others talk about, is it relates to this. It is that just the inherent variability across LEAs, across counties, in terms of where the employer demand will be, what types of jobs are available, and what the capabilities of the individual school systems, LEAs, we really need to be mindful when we're building strategies of absolutely things that can be applied statewide. We want to do that, but we won't be successful if we don't take into consideration, okay, how does this work across all of our LEAs? So we need a state strategy that is, I think, mindful of and honors the variances across LEAs. Yeah. Anything you want to add to that?
Yeah, no, I was just sitting here thinking, this would probably also be a really good discussion to have with the local superintendents, because, I mean, they're the ones that are, boots on the ground trying to get this implemented, and I'm wondering if there's not a way then that we could be thinking about scheduling a time to get on there. I meet with them each month, so, I've got time on the agenda, and maybe it's a time then that we fill part of that slot then with getting their feedback on what do they see are going to be, successes, what do they think are going to be some of the struggles, do they have the right people in place right now to be doing this work in terms of outreach. So there's a lot of things that are coming, I'm thinking about, but it would be great to hear from them.
I love that. I love that. So I'm excited by one, the work of the 2030 Commission that is really trying to look at some of these big strategic areas that we're talking about. The conversation that we're going to have at the September 18th Governor's Workforce Development Board meeting. I really encourage everyone to be there who can. Just as a reminder, it's at 4 p.m. at the Luminous Health Anne Arundel Medical Center in Annapolis. So you should have all those details, but if you need any information, please let us know. And then I would just ask that if anyone has certain things that are on your mind that you want to hear from Secretary Wu's team that day, let's tee this up to have a really meaty conversation, because I think we have to move beyond theoretical into practical. What, like even when we talk about talking to superintendents, if I'm a superintendent, I want to know, okay, well, tell me what apprenticeships are we envisioning being available in my,
Exactly.
and then what does that mean in terms of the content that I need to provide, or the instruction that I need to provide, and how do I, so that's where we really start to make this stuff happen, I think. And then the last thing I want to say about this in general, and I'll probably say this more than one time because this has been on my mind as well, is just reminding us that what we're doing here is disruptive innovation, not incremental improvement. And that has really come to me a lot over the last year and the work we've been doing. And I think if we just acknowledge that, that's often where a lot of the discomfort comes from, because it's like incremental improvement means we are building on things that we're already doing, and you want to do that. That's not, disruptive innovation means we might have to think completely differently about what is possible, what are the industries that are here? What are the employers that have a presence here? How do we think differently writ large about the way we're engaging employers? I'm using that as an example. I'm sure we'll have to do the same thing when we start talking about things like instruction and all of that. But I just want to acknowledge that that's what we're doing here. And so to the extent that it's uncomfortable, we're headed in the right direction is my typical view on these things.
One other thing I was going to ask, and Portia, maybe you know the answer to this. I mean, I know there's got to be, at least in my former life, there were like rules and regulations around businesses that high schoolers could and could not engage in with certain businesses. And so that would be helpful, I mean, for me to know what Maryland's rules are around, we'd love to do that, but you've got to be 21 years of age, or we'd love to do that, but you've got to be at least 19, whatever the it is. So that's a question that I have, and I don't know the answers to that.
Yes, happy to provide that information, and to your point, Doctor, love that suggestion, and thank you, Dr. Wright, about engaging directly with the superintendents together. We often have sort of one-off or hub and spoke, but that I think would be useful, and because there are sort of rules, and then there are industry practices, and for example, the construction industry, for various reasons, liability, whatever, like they don't want apprentices under 18, for example, on site. So like there can be issues, and that's not true of all employers, but there's some specifics there. So we, to the extent we can help school districts and their apprenticeship coordinators be aware of some of those nuances, we're happy to do that so people can focus where it makes the most sense.
That would be, I think that would be helpful when we meet with the superintendents to, in other words, start them thinking about the kinds of things that they want to be thinking about in their communities, but also letting them know that there's probably some guardrails with certain businesses that they may not have anticipated.
Great, thank you. Okay, let's move to the next item on our agenda, which is to talk through our proposed apprenticeship policy. Just some context setting here. Big reminder, the reason we're all here is that we want to make sure that all Maryland students leave high school globally competitive and prepared for success, right? We want them to end up in careers long-term that are where they are thriving and able to support themselves and their families in a meaningful way. And so the blueprint pillars that you see here on the slide are all interrelated and support one another in this broad-based aim. Goal number 4 is where our work sits, the CTE Committee. We have been slowly working through defining the terms within this 45% goal, both what are valuable industry recognized credentials. We're going to, by the way, that we approved that policy here. We submitted it to the AIB. We will talk a little bit later about some of the feedback. The AIB approved that as well with some feedback, and so we'll talk about that a little bit later. So that was a big component. And then the other piece that we need to approve and present to the AIB is how we define high school level of a registered apprenticeship. And so defining that has been this balance of really understanding the letter of the law and the intent of the law, as is often the case in many things when you try to write things down. Sometimes you forget, right? It doesn't always come out to include everything you want. So that's what we're trying to do here is again, how do we stay true to the intent of the law? And so again, what the aim here is in terms of 45% of high school students completing the high school level of registered apprenticeship or another industry recognized credential is we want apprenticeships to be the gold standard. We know that getting students in jobs, that is the clearest, most direct path to the outcomes we want for our students. In many cases, those apprenticeships may not be available. And so what are the options available to students where that is not an option? Registered apprenticeships are industry recognized credentials. What other industry recognized credentials can be a second choice there when apprenticeships are not available? So what I'm going to ask Rachel to walk us through is you all have seen the draft of the policy. There's been a lot of conversation and discussion, a lot of stakeholder engagement around this. And I think we've gotten to a good place in terms of this draft to submit to the AIB for consideration. But I'd love for Rachel to kind of walk us through some of these pieces. Also calling out that we, again, incorporating multiple voices, made some adjustments that Rachel will share that I think fairly encompass all the different voices that we've heard as part of this process.
Thank you, Chair Norton. And I'll pause for kind of questions, dialogue along the way as well as we talk through this. But first, just kind of to sort of reiterate what the process has been around designing this apprenticeship policy. As Chair Norton indicated, this has been a very collaborative process with a lot of stakeholder engagement over really the last, I'd say, 9 to 10 months. And this draft has been really, as she indicated, a result of very careful consideration of what's already written in blueprint law, And of course, working closely with teams across the Maryland Department of Labor, MSDE, the AIB, and many of our other kind of local and regional partners as well, to really understand what implementation of this policy could look like and the impacts that will have, so we understand the policy that we're putting forward here today. This committee did review a draft in February before it went out for its first round of public comment. And so we have been kind of working through public comment and various focus group discussions from there to get to this point today. The law really focuses specifically on registered apprenticeship, as you saw in kind of the quoted goal previously. So this policy, again, really underscores registered apprenticeship as the gold standard and kind of outlines how we're defining the high school level of that, as well as what we are kind of calling upon stakeholders, partners, sister agencies to do to help really advance that goal based on what we know the landscape looks like and what's currently possible, what we know we can be doing starting tomorrow. And just a kind of quick note on some of the feedback we did receive. We got, I think, really good feedback across the board in terms of whether it was written feedback during our public comment or in our dialogues with different stakeholder groups from every county across the state represented in our feedback. We had employers providing feedback, members of local workforce development boards, LEAs, CTE directors, community college representatives. We had, I just think, really a great swath of stakeholder engagement. So I want to thank all of our members of the viewing public for engaging with us and engaging your networks with us to really inform this policy. And just kind of a sort of note on the next steps here after this discussion today. If we vote to approve this policy, it will move to the Accountability and Implementation Board, where they will kind of have the final say on its approval for implementation before we really hit the ground running. So to kind of talk through what's here in the components of the goal, really. Again, setting that gold standard for registered apprenticeship and specifically defining what it means to complete the high school level. Most registered apprenticeships entail 2,000 plus hours of on-the-job training. These are all registered apprenticeships. By the way, the policy refers specifically to registered apprenticeships approved by the Maryland Apprenticeship and Training Council. And so to complete the high school level, this policy proposes setting the floor for that at 144 hours of related instruction and 250 or more hours of on-the-job training before the student graduates high school, with the understanding that depending on the requirements of their state-approved apprenticeship, there may be more hours, there should be and will be more hours that they're completing after graduation. Yes, yeah, please.
And I should know the answer, but anyway.
That's okay.
How many students graduate from high school on any given year from the state of Maryland?
I know the projection for 2030, but I actually don't know today's number.
Today's numbers I said, or?
But I know
Roughly,
that.
is it 50,000, 20,000,
Let me ping my.
10,000?
Yeah, but I will say I know that for
Around 60,000.
yes, yeah.
My guess.
Yeah, around 60,000,
Yes.
and then projections for 2030 would be around 70,000.
Yeah.
70,000. So we want about 30,000.
To achieve the 45% goal and to have,
Thirty.
sort of per that definitional slide earlier, a little over half,
Yeah.
a majority share per the law being registered apprenticeship would mean, upwards of 15,000, a little more than 15,000 students. I will say right now the number, and I was going to get to this, so thank you for asking. This is a big shift to kind of really push a huge increase in registered apprenticeship participation. It's that disruptive innovation. As Chair Norton said, right now today, or I should say today, as of September, the Maryland Apprenticeship Training Program anticipates 16 and 17-year-olds will be active registered apprentices. So it's not quite going from 0 to over 15,000, but it is going from 17 to.
I asked that question to understand our capacity, because if 70,000 we are expecting, and then 45%, somewhere 30,000. So having capacity to have 140 hours of instruction and 250 hours of job training, that kind of careful planning will need.
Yes, no, absolutely. That's exactly right. And that's part of why I think the contents of some of the initial steps that we propose in this policy are so important, and why some of that understanding the employer needs and getting to that level as we move this forward is necessary for every single program, every single student.
Yeah, you've just totally made my point here,
Yeah.
which is like, this is why we need to understand employer demand at a very pretty granular level, because that drives what related instruction needs to be provided and at what scale and in what LEA, in what location, and it's,
Yeah.
right? It's all, you know.
I think that data is available because this, 70,000 students, we know how they are distributed among our school system. We can do 45%, and then what industries are there, and understanding the local capacity. And,
Yeah.
and I
Well, it's interesting you say that, because this is where I think the disruptive innovation part comes in, where if we just forwards map like we know what industries are there today, I don't know that we'll get where we need to be. So it's sort of like, all right, whiteboard, what are the industries across the state? How might we think about bringing capacity in different counties to other counties? How might we bring national, we were talking about this earlier, all right, how might we get Walgreens, and they're like Safeway and national employers to learn from their colleagues and peers that are doing this work. It's that kind of thinking we're going to have to do, because if we just try to forward map what we've been doing, I mean, no state has done this. Let's just be clear.
Yeah.
We're going to have to think about it.
And and then the other thing will be identifying some common transferable skills that each student in this, apprenticeship learns. And there are other, powerful simulations, and lots of innovation is possible in that area. I'm a mathematician, so I like to think, how big is this issue? Thank you.
I'm really glad you raised that, and it also raises the critical point that we are very explicit about in the kind of upfront summary of the policy, which is that we recognize this is going to be a phased approach. We're not, no one's going to from 17 to 45% to 17 to 15,000 plus in a year, and so that we recognize that as well, and recognize there might again be more that's needed as we really unpack all these things we're talking about today. There's probably additional steps that need to be taken to really make this goal, sort of bring this goal within reach. So thank you for the discussion on that. And this framework kind of here on the slide is also provided in the policy and kind of just summarizes, again, as Chair Norton kind of indicated, registered apprenticeship as this kind of gold standard for the blueprint 45% goal, other industry recognized credentials, which we've defined in policy that we'll talk about later today again, sort of as that option where a registered apprenticeship program may not be available or may not be available right now, as we're working to disrupt and expand those opportunities. And then this is critical. I know that, among stakeholders, we were hearing right from the get-go a ton of questions around, well, we recognize maybe youth apprenticeship isn't explicitly called out in the 45% goal, but Maryland's been investing in youth apprenticeship, which is a little different than registered apprenticeship, and our policy includes some appendix information to kind of just describe those differences a little bit, what happens there. And after really, careful consideration, again, a lot of input from across the board with our stakeholders, we've landed here where you see indicated in this graphic, youth apprenticeship can support the 45% goal when a youth apprentice is earning an industry recognized credential as part of their youth apprenticeship program. In that instance, it will count under, and I apologize, I think some of the formatting on the slides might look a little funky, but I promise it's legible in the actual policy, that will count under the industry recognized credential portion of the 45% goal, as opposed to counting as a registered apprenticeship, because the registered apprenticeship piece is registered apprenticeship pretty clearly defined. So, yeah.
I apologize, Rachel, for putting you on the spot. I should know the answer to this question, but I actually don't. Did we have a sense from the feedback of what percentage of the current youth apprenticeships probably fall in this bucket with the IRCs? Because I want to be sensitive to the fact, I understand wanting to have this requirement be very robust. I know a lot of LEAs have invested in developing these youth apprenticeship models. So of course we want to, get everyone rowing in the same direction and getting them to be able to award and incorporate these industry recognized credentials, or articulate much more closely to a registered apprenticeship pathway.
Yeah.
I mean, I think that's the hope, is they would, all these things will merge and people will be going in the same direction. But
Yeah.
I don't know if we know that number,
No, it's
or
a
a sense of
and
it.
I will admit, I apologize. I didn't bring the number with me. We do have a rough sense. I will admit it's not perfectly tracked in data to date. Going forward, it's going to be tracked much more carefully, especially with the establishment of this goal and some of the data provisions in the policy. But we know it's a fairly low percentage. It would be, for many youth apprenticeship programs that currently exist, this will be a change if the desire is for that youth apprenticeship to count toward the 45% goal.
So Richard's,
Yes, I'm
Richard's coaching me over there. I'm going to call him out for that. Richard, you had an answer, I think, to Secretary Wu's question.
Oh, great, even better.
Yes, so the majority of our apprenticeships right now are youth apprenticeships. It's a very small number, like low double digits outside of that space. And then when we talked about layering in industry
That was,
recognized credentials, about half or so of those youth apprenticeships are directly aligned. But this is why we're reworking the programs to make sure that we're appropriately enrolled.
Yeah, and I'm glad you pointed out directly aligned because there are some that probably could quite easily work in an industry recognized credential, just maybe haven't been required to yet, and others where that would be either not possible or new addition. Yeah.
That is a number of our, what counts as an industry credential historically in Maryland, also includes technical skill assessments. So we'd have to, really tease that out to get to a really good number. There's some work that needs to happen.
Yeah.
Do you want to restate? Because I don't know.
Yes, and yes, thank you. And just for the viewing audience, Richard Kincaid, very helpful information. I should have called you up to one of these microphones. I apologize. I think to summarize, essentially, Richard was pointing out that kind of reaffirming just the small number participating in registered apprenticeships right now. I mentioned earlier, low double digits, 17. And then among youth apprenticeships, recognizing that it's not, a large number of youth apprenticeships do not currently incorporate industry recognized credentials. About half either include or are aligned to industry recognized credentials. And so that means there's probably opportunity, low-hanging fruit, to quickly be able to easily add industry recognized credentials into some existing youth apprenticeships. But it may be the case that others just don't line up with a credential or would need to rethink their programming to add that in. I think I caught that right. Yes? Okay, great. Yes. Okay, awesome. All right, and so I'll pause here for another moment. Just, we've kind of run through this, and of course this also does, just to clarify for all those questions, because it's not a registered apprenticeship or an industry recognized credential in and of itself. Without that industry recognized credential, youth apprenticeship does not support the 45% goal. So I'll stop there and see if anyone else on the committee has any questions or comments or reactions to this. Okay. All right, thank you. A couple of other things I'll note while we're on this slide, just to highlight some changes that I want to make sure the committee's aware of and our viewers are aware of, and will of course be, once hopefully the AIB approves this, making this known to LEAs and all our stakeholders across the board. But a couple key changes: this floor, having these floors for completion during high school, this is sort of a new element and something we really heard a lot about actually from a number of stakeholder types, including employers, who were really saying, we need to make sure that on-the-job training is happening while a student is still participating in high school. We'll talk a little bit more about how that can happen. There's some ideas in the policy around that as well. But they were really saying that concurrent related instruction and on-the-job experience is a really key component of the model for them, and they wouldn't want to see that potentially lost by delaying on-the-job training until after graduation. So that's why we worked in a floor, and the idea with the 250 hours kind of being a low floor for before graduation is to still allow flexibility. To Chair Norton's point, we have a lot to learn about exactly what employers are going to need to be able to engage in this way and develop registered apprenticeships. And so we wanted to make sure, while we had a floor to ensure this is built into the program, we weren't so restrictive that we were not flexible to what a specific employer might need in order to work with a young person. So that's a change I wanted to highlight. And another, which we've discussed with our colleagues at MSD and the Department of Labor and reached agreement on, was to kind of streamline the terms out there being used. So we had school to apprenticeship, registered apprenticeship, youth apprenticeship, AMP, the Apprenticeship Maryland program. And so going forward, once this, approved by AIB and this policy is enacted, the two terms in use will be registered apprenticeship and youth apprenticeship, just to really kind of help keep clear, to the extent possible. It's an ongoing education process, of course, with employers and other stakeholders working on apprenticeship, but to really streamline and simplify those terms, just to support that a little bit.
So youth apprenticeship does not count towards 45%.
It cannot, because it's not a registered apprenticeship or an industry recognized credential in and of itself.
What if a youth gets an industry recognized?
Then it counts as under the industry recognized credential category of the 45%. Yeah.
Thank you.
Yes. Yeah. Very important. Yeah.
Rachel, I had a question. I know we talked a little bit about having kind of that floor for OJT.
how are we addressing industries like construction where they physically can't go to work? Well, how are we, creating that floor may sometimes prevent them. They may be moving more to the industry recognized credential, which lessens the likelihood of RA.
Yeah, well, and so that points to, I think, two really important things. There is that secondary credential option, but to expand registered apprenticeship in these occupations, and this is, I think, I'm going to connect it back again to what Chair Norton mentioned earlier, the ongoing work that it will take, and it takes a lot of work and time to really engage employers effectively around the design of their programs and then understanding student barriers for that specific program, location, employer, where that student is. Transportation will be an issue for some, and we already know that. We have called out that as a specific barrier where we want to see some attention paid in the apprenticeship policy, but there will need to be more work done. I know the Apprenticeship 2030 Commission is talking about that, among other things, as potential barriers to propose recommendations around, so that there are tools more readily available to support students who have that barrier, so that we don't hinder registered apprenticeship development because someone can't make it to a job site, right? That would certainly not be ideal. So that was a long way of explaining. I don't think we have an answer. Some good things happening in pockets across the state, but we don't have an answer right now today for this policy. But that is absolutely something on the radar for the Apprenticeship 2030 Commission, and certainly something this group can opt to take up at any time as well.
Just in general, I think if there's just an alternate option, if there's an age restriction or something in place where you can increase the number of hours of related instruction versus having to do ODHE, when that is in play. But when that's not in play, then you can continue down this road. I just think an alternate option where you have age restrictions would be helpful.
I apologize. I'll let someone. I might not be I'm sorry. I was going to see if anyone else understood. I might not be understanding. Is there a suggestion to remove the floor, or is there a suggestion to consider certain circumstances where the floor might not be?
I think the suggestion is to indicate that there may be a reason to have an alternate as it pertains to the floor, especially when there are regulatory restrictions.
Yes.
So even if it's a note for now, we don't have an alternative, but a note to say if there are regulatory restrictions, like for example, if you want to be a nurse, you got to be 18, right? That doesn't mean you can't train to be a nurse before you turn 18. So I can't meet that floor under registered apprenticeship because I'm not 18. However, maybe I can add hours to my in-school training hours, which prepares me for the registered apprenticeship once I do turn 18. And so just that regulatory piece, when they are mandated by regulation, not allowing them to do it, do we have an alternative for someone to still have a registered apprenticeship program?
Yeah, and I'm glad you're raising that. I think that is actually something, I like the idea of having it as a note to address, because it also will intersect with, if I'm not misunderstanding, the MATC kind of rules, regulations, requirements. As they approve programs, they're also taking into consideration whatever existing restrictions may be in place. And so that's a very good point, because we wouldn't, I guess the kind of bottom line point of this is that it's possible that you'd kind of force a pathway to only focus on a credential that could be apprenticed if the person cannot participate in any on-the-job learning as a result of an age restriction on the job site. Yeah. Okay. Thank you. Yeah.
And I did just want to jump in at the bottom of page 7 of the policy. We do say if an employer or program sponsor wishes to propose exceptions to these minimum requirements based on their industry or occupation specific needs, they may send a letter of justification to the CTE committee and MATC for approval. So I think we were kind of thinking a little bit about that, but maybe more guidance to come.
Yeah, I actually forgot we'd kind of talked about some of that.
It's
Thank
a
you,
lengthy
Molly.
document.
It's been a long 9 months. Thank you. And
We've got a lot in here.
so that's good. And this does point out that maybe there's more guidance that needs to happen around this, or more kind of communication. But in the meantime, we do have a process outlined in the policy. This is good for everyone to hear. So that if there is a need for an exception, we can at least, along with MATC, consider it. Yeah. Thank you. Thank you, Molly. Great. Good for us. Okay. Good. That's a really, really wonderful point. And before I move on, let me just see. I wanted to make sure I covered some of the high points I had noted down. I think this covers some of the, more major items I wanted to make sure we got to on this piece. Before I move on from this, anything else around just kind of the basics? Okay, this slide shows us what counts toward the 45% goal under really a combined two policies between this policy and the industry recognized credential policy. Okay. I'll move for now. We can, of course, come back. I will just briefly spend a few minutes touching on another element of the policy where the committee has kind of called out both existing tools and some sort of requested actions we're calling upon to expand registered apprenticeship, specifically among high school students. So I won't go into detail on each one, but the policy does lay out and cite to various resources on some of the items, including those you see on the slide. A couple that I'll just highlight is one, understanding that under the blueprint and sort of the AIB's direction, one of the intentions is that career and technical education programs can provide the related instruction of registered apprenticeship as a tool to essentially already fully funded related instruction for registered apprenticeship through the high school CTE pathways. There are already provisions so that LEAs can award credit to a high school diploma for on-the-job training and related instruction in an apprenticeship, so that this can support a student's requirements for graduation and their credit attainment. And of course, some of the age conversations we had earlier are also called out. We do cite to sort of the existing across the board regulations. We don't go occupation by occupation into licensing particularities, but just noting that the Maryland state law already does not allow for employment discrimination on the basis of age for anyone over the age of 16, unless, of course, again, specific occupational licensing requirements are in place and have been approved by licensing boards, or they fall into kind of a hazardous occupation exemption category. So both those points are highlighted in the policy to kind of just help do a little bit of clarification, myth busting around some of the information or hypotheses that have been out there. We highlight some existing funding opportunities and the fact that the Maryland Apprenticeship and Training Program has significantly expanded its staff, and as Secretary Wu and Chair Norton have spoken about briefly and will be sharing more about on September 18th, there are plans to really leverage those staff to support this huge expansion strategy for registered apprenticeship for all ages, including among high school students. And we'll hear a little bit more about what that looks like soon. So I wanted to just highlight those. Any kind of quick questions or reactions on this piece?
Just one thing I'm kind of remembering, and I don't, maybe someone on the committee can help me get clear about this, but I do think in the state of Maryland, relative to the age, the issue, age discrimination is against the law
Yes.
in the state of Maryland. So I don't know how that feeds into but we should also think about what are the, what is possible given the kind of statutory posture that we have here in the state. Am I getting that right? People who know this stuff better than I do.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, and I know a critical point I think on that is that, at least officially speaking, under law, age is not a factor in setting workers' compensation rates. And so, again, there's certain occupations, hazardous work sites, where there's some differences here, of course. But in general, where those exemptions are not in place, that's something that some employers, as Secretary indicated earlier, some of it's real for certain employers, for some it's not, but they might think it is or be worried about it. So we wanted to kind of make sure that information was front and center here too, so that as we roll this work forward, start engaging with industry, we can all be really clear with one voice around what is and isn't on the table.
Great.
Thank you. All right.
Did we get through everything on the apprenticeship policy?
On this piece, I think am I leveling one more? Sorry. I do have one more quick piece. I won't go through everything here so we can kind of move on, but I did just want to highlight for members in the audience, I know members have reviewed this, but in the apprenticeship policy, we also have kind of recommendations, actions we're calling for from sister agencies, local partners, to kind of further expansion. And we have those in 5 key areas that are noted here on the slides. So those areas are targeting resources and investment wherever possible around registered apprenticeship expansion for high school students. The employer engagement piece, we've got homework to do there for sure. Removing barriers to participation. So this is where we've looked at, knowing we don't know everything in every region, every barrier we're going to encounter yet. What are some things that we know we need to address, move out of the way, so that registered apprenticeship expansion is possible as soon as we're engaging more and more employers, really starting now in this program. Another kind of a little bit, more on the under the hood side, but really improving data tracking and performance monitoring. all of this work that we are calling on our sister agencies to do, that we have to do as a committee, requires a lot of information and a lot of new tracking, reporting, collaborating with folks who already have other data and reporting requirements that they're dealing with. And so we start laying out some parameters and next steps here. Some of this is, kind of next steps to map out data needs, tracking needs, what that means for different agencies, so that all of us as a state, can make sure we're operating with the best, most up-to-date information we can as we keep assessing how implementation of this policy is going, what we might need to change down the road. And then the fifth is addressing regulatory barriers. So some of these things we've touched on earlier, there might be we touched on some specific barriers in the policy that we see an opportunity to consider addressing. I know I glossed over those a little bit, but I'll just pause and see if anyone had anything in the policy they kind of noticed or wanted to call out or discuss further before we move on.
Okay.
Great. Okay.
Well, maybe that means we did a good job. Okay, so we're now going to consider passing this as a policy to then forward on to the AIB for their review and comment. So I would like to make a motion that we vote to adopt the apprenticeship policy to be submitted to the AIB.
So moved.
Thank you, thank you. Any discussion? All in favor? Aye? Aye. Any
Aye.
opposed? Thank you. Any opposed? Okay, thank you. The policy is approved. It will now, programmatically, what will happen is it will be submitted to the AIB, much like the IRC policy, which we're about to hear the AIB's feedback on. The AIB will either approve it or not and give us, but even in this case with the IRC policy, they approved the IRC policy and just had a couple of feedback points for things that we want to think about. So I'm going to turn it over to Molly to talk through that.
Thank you, Myra. So as Myra indicated, as you all remember, back at our May meeting, we approved the IRC policy, which really defined valuable credentials and what the required criteria would be, an assessment process for reviewing those credentials to count towards the 45% goal. So you all approved that policy in May, and then we submitted it to the AIB. At the AIB's August 1st public meeting, they approved the policy with the following feedback for consideration, futures consideration, which you can see on the slide there, and then in your meeting materials is also their official feedback in writing. And so we met with the AIB in order to make sure we completely understood what their feedback was, so that we could relay that to you all, and just really, it's really more items for us to kind of consider as we move forward. So the first item of feedback is consider developing additional guidance for students who partially complete or earn partial credit toward an IRC during high school. And so in our meeting with the AIB staff, the intent of this was really with respect to those credentials where there might be an age requirement that limits a high school student from taking that IRC, the credential assessment. So what I mean by that is pharmacy technician has an 18 years old requirement in order to take that licensing exam. And so if you are young for your grade, if you're born in May, June, July, or August typically, and you might not be 18 by the time of graduation in order to sit for that exam. And so, I think all of us know the intent and spirit of this with respect to, even though the law says, prior to high school graduation, obviously a student who is young for the grade or older for the grade shouldn't really matter if they've gone through all the curriculum and so forth to prepare for that exam. And so in our policy, we certainly intended to, nod to that we kind of need to figure out how we're going to capture this data for students who earn that credential potentially after they graduate. And so we'll be working, with MSDE, MLDS, and MHEC and so forth in order to kind of figure out some of these data processes. Because there are quite a few, elements to consider there. What's sort of the timeline that we would sort of cut that off at. And then also, there's different bodies and how we get that credential exam, so credential assessment attainment. information. So, we've got licensing boards, so some of them do report that data, but then we also have third-party vendors as well. And so in order to get some of that data, you would need data sharing agreements and so forth, because a lot of the times the LEAs themselves might not have contact with that student much for very long after they graduate. So really getting that reporting mechanism in place will be an important process for our next steps. So any questions on that item of feedback? Great. And then the second piece of feedback basically states, so as currently written, completion of an IRC includes an option number 2 for students, and I'll take us to that definition in a second, who earn college credit in high school to be included in the 45% goal. As part of the CTE Committee's plan to meet the 45% goal, reconsider this provision in the policy to ensure that college credits are not counted toward the 45% goal and also toward the number of college credits earned by high school students as part of completing another post-CCR pathway. And so we'll go to the next slide real quick so you all can see the language here. So in that middle bucket is where we had put one definition of completion, was really a nod to those occupations where the degree is that credential. So if the high school student earns credit towards their engineering degree, for instance, but they cannot get an actual credential in high school, that there should be elements of that would count in this 45% goal. And part of our next steps recommendations was for MSDE and MHEC to work very closely on putting very specific guardrails around this. Again, you may remember this was not intended to be sort of the Bachelor of Arts in History or so forth. It's really where that degree is that occupation's credential. So we often use engineering or teaching as an example. And so when we met with the AIB to really clarify, okay, what is your feedback with respect to what they meant there? And so to sum it up, what the AIB staff explained is that their intent with how they wrote that feedback is to not double count with respect to the 55% goal. Now, the 55% goal, something Secretary Rye could speak to better than I can, but the 55% goal, to summarize, was set, I believe, in 2013, and it was that 55% of Maryland adults ages 25 to 65 will have earned at least an associate's degree. And so when they're talking about double counting, they're kind of talking about that. And that's really where the original 45% goal came from. Now, we can, I'll let you jump in, Secretary Rye.
I have a lot to say about that, but I'll be brief. So first of all, that goal, 55%, was done at a very different time, right? Our state has changed, our business industries have changed. So I think we have to look at it differently. But I do want to say that if a student gets let's say a certificate in cybersecurity while being in high school, a certificate in networking from a community college, while the student is in high school, it should be counted towards 45%. That is, credentials earned while being in high school. Makes sense. All our P-Tech program, those things should count towards 45%. And sure, when we are coming up with new goals, well, we will include things other than associate degrees as well. Certain certification and other things will be counted. So I think this double counting and all, we shouldn't worry. The idea is to create workforce, right? An early introduction into workforce. That's what we're trying to do. It's a good thing. It should be counted.
Yeah, and I'll just quickly kind of add for more consideration. We would love feedback on this point because part of the discussion here is what do we do with this feedback? Do we make a change based on it or not? They approved it with this for consideration. They did not request a change. And I will add, I think in the conversations, with their staff, they talked about double counting, and we also kind of jointly acknowledged that this will be an issue in a number of areas potentially, right? So like if a student's using a course that can count as dual enrollment with a community college to fulfill the related instruction of a registered apprenticeship, they would count in our registered apprenticeship goal. We'd of course want to count them. Would they also then count towards some dual enrollment data tracking that the IB, is doing as part of the blueprint? This goal is the only one with a percentage attached, right? Like the 45%, we've got a target to hit. The others are increase and kind of some data tracking, right? But we did acknowledge that, to your point, perhaps, this double counting issue could come up in a number of scenarios potentially. And with certificates as well, as you pointed out.
What is not clear to me is what is the issue with double counting? What problem does it create?
Yeah, that was going to be my
That's
question. I
where
don't
I was coming from.
understand, Dr. Wright, maybe you can illuminate for us, because, I mean, a lot of people might get these credentials or complete this level of apprenticeship in their junior or senior year.
Yes.
That's part of their,
Yes.
college and career readiness pathway.
Yeah, I'm not I'm with you. I'm not following the reason for that at all. I think that, to me, we're not trying to divide them into different sets of people, right? And I think that if there are a lot of kids that are excelling this way, and for them to not see that as counting, but likewise, I'm all for setting an education attainment goal for the state. I think the state needs an education attainment goal. And if it's 55%, it's 55%. But I think when we're talking about children and the experiences that they're having, and what we're trying to expand on the number of experiences that they're having, it would be very, very limiting if we just said, oh, you can do that, but that doesn't count,
Yeah, I also think this speaks to kind of a discussion we've had at past meetings around education and work, and where it's pushing towards the theory of either or and not both, right? And when you double count in that way, I've started with my certificates to get to my higher education at the community college, to go to my four-year college. It really indicates collectively that there's an and, that you can build your career either way. And I think by changing this, we may be kind of going down that same road of it's an either or and not an and.
I think another area that really needs to be looked at is the definition of the college credit. The continued evolution of what we are trying to produce for workforce has to include the non-credit and the continuing ed experiences our students take. There are many more experiences that are out there now that high school students are taking that are not traditional AA or bachelor degree driven. So there are workforce programs that are out there where students can earn industry recognized credentials with single classes or groups of classes, which make them college and career ready and are able to enter the workforce with those non-credit experiences. Those certificates, especially in the areas of cybersecurity, are just as valuable as a degree. So I think that needs to be looked at in this piece as well.
Absolutely. And I think what's great about what you're pointing out is right now that would count for under our definition, whether it's something the student did while they were in high school or they got 80% of the way there and they're finishing it a year afterwards or 6 months afterwards maybe, right? And to Secretary Rye's point, well, when they reset their completion goals, they'd also be able to count that certificate a student got because it was a student in one of their colleges. It didn't matter that they were in high school when they started or when they completed that certificate, right? But it does still meet the intent as this committee, and what I'm hearing as this committee sees it, of what this goal is about. I will acknowledge, I think one piece of what the AIB staff shared that did resonate, which I think we all agree with, is the 45% goal is designed to make sure students have it's about multiple options. It's about registered apprenticeship options. It's about credentialing options, not necessarily a one or the other, not necessarily two groups of students. At the same time, it's also not about all of our college going students are going to get there through apprenticeship instead, but it's all the same students being served, right? This is about serving more students on net at the same time. So I know that this committee was really thoughtful about trying to strike that balance and what we counted as completion here and how we were approaching this policy. So I did just kind of want to name that reality as well. And so I think what I'm hearing from the committee on this, and anyone please jump in if I'm mishearing, and virtually, by the way, as well, for our members joining us virtually, is Molly kind of indicated one of the next steps here is going to be around, sort of coming together with MHEC, labor, MSDE to think about, okay, as we parse out different goals, data collection, how we're counting different things, let's make sure the guidance, the information, that just all of that is very clear, and we can be very, very clear and specific about that, but without necessarily changing the definition of completion we have here. Is that what I'm hearing?
Yeah, absolutely. I was just going to say, we've been talking an awful lot about data collection, but I think we're really going to have to really, really dig into what does that mean?
Yeah.
What does that look like? Do we
Yep.
have the infrastructure? Do we have the ability for systems to talk across systems? I mean,
We're gonna find
all
some
of
no's, I
Yeah.
think, yeah.
And so having just had this discussion internally about something else, it's like, no, you can't have this system not talk to this system when we need both sets of data. We need a way to meld the data so that we're not having to go to 6 different, 10 different, ever how many different places to collect the data, and then merge the data, from different spots. So I'm just putting that out there, that we need to be thoughtful about each of our organizations and what's the level and capacity for data collection that we have.
Absolutely.
Yeah, and I want to underscore that, because to me, everything we're doing here is about, and when I think about this double counting issue, I agree with everything everybody said. To me, the fundamental problem we're trying to solve and that we want to be mindful of is we don't want to create a big gaping hole that a bunch of our students fall through because we haven't thought about, if they do this and this, where they get left out of the workforce, right? And that's the question I feel like we have to keep coming back to. I mean, I probably shouldn't say this, but I don't really care about double counting because that feels like bean counting. I'm more worried about, like, what are the outcomes for the students? How do we think that this will impact outcomes for students? And I feel like that's what should drive this next set of conversations is, are we doing anything here that we think will have a negative impact on students?
Yeah, and I'll just also underscore, we're passing a policy today. There's nothing to stop us from revisiting it a year, 2 years, 3 years from now, as we're maybe building some new data systems or interoperability, and then really getting good information about who's falling through the cracks, what's not happening that we need to see happening.
I want to say big +1 to what you just said, because we won't know. We're going to have some really rigorous thought and hypothesis building about what we're doing, because we're not going to know for a number of years. But we have to, whatever we need to do to figure out how do we invest in getting these systems to the place, we have to know what happens to students. Otherwise, what are we doing, Yeah.
Great. Next slide then. So just so you all know kind of what's happening next, and we'll kind of continue discussions around sort of putting really specific parameters around guidance and for completion. And then, of course, as we talked about, really digging deeper into the data collection and, to Dr. Wright's point, making sure all the data systems are talking together. And there's a lot of implications to work through here. And so I know some of you are members of our data subgroup, so we'll be asking you to kind of pull in for some of those discussions as well. But that'll be sort of our next phase of work. And then, of course, also DWDL will be developing guidance around specifically how a pre-apprenticeship would count in meeting our IRC criteria. Of course, it has to meet the 7 required criteria. And then also MSDE is already developing, and I think, I don't know, Richard, you could speak to at another point, some of these pieces are probably ready in the near future, but really putting together very specific guidance for LEAs on the industry recognized credential policy, and then also really breaking out sort of the business rules for how each criteria is assessed, so that members of the public, members here as well, can kind of really dig in on each piece there. Also a program of study crosswalk, so you could really see the CTE programs and what industry recognized credentials they align to. And then also, sort of like more marketing materials about, this is what this credential will lead to this job, and so forth. And so just there's a lot of exciting work to come, and really looking forward to that. So next slide. No, you're good. And then just to update you all on the current process. So we originally had in our policy that the application was going to launch August 1st through October 31st for credentials that were not on that original list to be considered. If you recall, there was about 210 that met our initial criteria. And so given that the AIB's meeting was August 1st, we obviously didn't know if we would have to make any tweaks to that. And so that application was launched earlier this week. So LEAs, local workforce boards, community colleges, so forth, other partners still have a little over 2 months to submit applications for credentials that are not currently on that list to be assessed. And then MSDE will be reviewing those credentials and then putting before the forward before the committee here which credentials they would recommend based on whether they met the criteria should be approved or not approved. And then that full final list of approved credentials will go live. It is already out there for the public for the 210 to be reviewed and aligned to their programs of study. And then that will go into effect next school year. So that's the 25-26 school year. Any questions on that? All right, great. Oh, and then of course, we will also biannually be reviewing the full list to make sure it doesn't get stagnant or old. So that's that.
And I will just highlight that we will definitely be working with Richard's team at MSD to make sure we're getting the word out now that this is open, to make sure that folks have that opportunity to apply. Thanks, Molly.
Okay. Excellent. We've got apprenticeship policy. Check. IRC policy. Check. Now we're going to hear expert review teams. John, please give us an update on where we are.
Sure. I just told them to make me look really good on these cameras. So you guys look great already, so I hope it's me too. Good afternoon. It's good to see you all. My name is John. If you haven't seen me before or heard my voice, I'm the expert review team manager for the CTE committee. I've been doing this job for a year. The job has opened my eyes to a lot of things and a lot of what the goings on are in this state, and I'm super excited because this coming school year is when we are going to jump into our full deployment of our expert review teams for the CTE committee. So it's exciting stuff, and part of this, most of this, has to do with you guys and your help too, so we'll get into that in just a few minutes, but it's good to see you all around this table. And Rachel's smiling. I love that. Thank you, Rachel. So before we start, I just want to make sure that we kind of level set our conversation around that the CTE committee and the CTE expert review teams were built and were written in order to monitor progress in two things. Creating a robust CTE system, so making sure that LEAs are doing that and we're helping support that. And also they're monitoring progress on the 45% goal that we have just been discussing for a little while. So that's kind of what we are there to do. And that, you know, all it makes me think about is granularly. I have an 8-year-old and a 5-year-old, and I want them to be in a place and in a position where they are ready post-secondary too. And so I love being part of that process. I think it's great, and this is exciting stuff. So that's what we're here to do, and that's what the expert review teams for CTE are here for. Next slide. So last year, it was the planning process and the piloting process for the CTE expert review teams. And what we decided our best option was to organize all of this work by LEA, not necessarily by school. Just because from our standpoint and from what I was hearing, CTE as a whole is more of an LEA thing right now and not necessarily individual schools. So we thought that we should organize around that. So that's what we have chosen to do, and what we're going to be doing for the next 2 years is we are going to be going to all 24 LEAs over the next 2 years to just gather a baseline of what is CTE in your LEA. What does it look like? What strategies are you using? What are your strengths? What are some challenges that you're bumping up against? And then just to get an idea of what that looks like before we start doing this disruptive innovation of it, we also need some of that baseline information, so we're not assuming what's happening and what's not happening. Next slide, please. Thank you. So last year in the spring, we did conduct 2 pilot visits. 2 of you were on those, which is exciting. We went to Queen Anne's County in March, and we went to Anne Arundel County in May. We structured those in a way of where we had an orientation beforehand with the team just to kind of get everybody on the same page, make sure we all looked at our materials, we knew what the daily schedule was going to look like, we knew how that was going to go down. We went to 2 schools in each one. We were there for a full day. We did focus groups, and the focus groups were CTE staff for the LEA. They were the administrators, they were the CTE teachers, CTE students, and then we talked to our career coaches, guidance counselors, and work-based learning staff, or whoever they had. We did classroom visits also. We were in there, and part of the job of the pilot visits in general were, hey, we're going to Queen Anne's, we're going to do some classroom visits, and we're going to go for X amount of time. We'll see if that works. If it doesn't work, let's change it, and we go to Anne Arundel, we're going to go for this amount of time, just so we can kind of see what that classroom visit window looks like. And then we did a debrief afterwards just to gather all of our notes and our information, so then we could compile some sort of report that can then be given to the LEA, so they can have an idea of what we saw and what we heard in those focus groups and through those classroom visits. Next slide.
And I'll just jump in really
Oh,
quick to say the one I
yes.
participated
Sure.
in, I really loved. The focus groups were so enlightening and helpful, and just really gave me a great perspective on some of the conversations we're having here. So John will talk more about your chances to engage this coming year, but I definitely encourage it.
So right here this is the most current map that I've put together. Now, Marquita did send me the most recent numbers. This was in like April or May. I said, I need exact numbers because I'm going to be sitting with a bunch of people that want the numbers. And so here's the number of all the high schools in Maryland that have at least one CTE program. The CTE program might be AMP, but it's at least one CTE program because we need to be able to see all of them by 2031. So that's what they all look like, give or take one or two. Marquita, I apologize if that's not right, but that's as close as we are to it, just so you all know. The reason that that's kind of there is because by 2031, we're supposed to see all high schools in Maryland that have a CTE program. However, next year, if you looked at the deployment plan, if you've not, here we are. Our plan is to visit 24, which is just above the 10%, but if you add 10% across the next 6 years, that's not 100%. So we're going to be looking at these 2 years while we're getting the baseline, then what are we targeting to then do after that in order to get all those visits done? And what priorities are we going to do, whether it's program priorities, school priorities, grade level priorities, whatever that looks like. So that's why this is there. Next. So here's where you come into play. These are the members that are written into our deployment plan, our implementation plan, and also the law as to be who has to be on visits. So those are the priority members. And then we have optional members that don't have to be on there, but they are ideal that they're on the teams. So you'll see here, I'll read through them. 1 to 3 of us, CTE committee staff. A teacher, a CTE teacher. So this teacher is from a neighboring LEA, ideally, and they are nominated by the CTE director or the CTE coordinator lead staff in that neighboring LEA. Thinking about career ladders. Thinking about those CTE teachers that want to be leaders, that want to move up. The teachers, we know professional development is huge, and teachers need as much as they can, and what better professional development is to get out of your own building and go see what's happening in other districts. And so that's one. School leaders, principals, assistant principals, academic deans, superintendents, doesn't matter to me. Everyone is welcome around the table. But this is also someone that might be nominated by the CTE director, someone that just wants to know more, wants to be more involved in CTE. And then an employer, trade union rep, or an apprenticeship sponsor. They have to be on all of those visits. And then the optional members are CTE committee member or designee, which is you, look at that. And local workforce to board representative, that might be a staff person or it might be a board member. You have local community college representatives and then representatives from other agencies that are responsible for implementing the blueprint, MSDE, AIB, WDAL, all those things. So anyway, everybody's involved. It's a big party. Shauna even said she's coming. So that's how this is going to go. So anyway, this is where you come into play because ideally what we would love is for a CTE member or two to go on every visit, or your designee and someone to go on every visit. Our voices around this table are super important, especially you. I think you guys being able to come into schools and stepping foot in the buildings and talking to these kids makes these meetings even more in depth. Just seeing what people are saying and what you're hearing and how things are going in these LEAs and how we can support them not carrying the load of everything. So I think this is important for you guys to be there. And then at the bottom, that's our visit timeline, just so you're aware of that. That's how many visits we're going to try to do. It's basically one every couple weeks with holidays and things like that in mind. But anyway, that's kind of what that's going to look like. Yes, Rachel.
Yeah, thank you, John.
Yes.
And just if we could take a moment, I think you sort of referenced some of this earlier, but I want to make sure the committee and our kind of viewers understand sort of some of the purposes of the CTE expert review teams, and you kind of talked about it. I wanted to just kind of underscore why we really would value committee participation and participation from these other participants indicated on your slide. The expert review teams have that opportunity to do all this learning. First and foremost, it impacts all of this work that we do here. That setting the baseline you talked about is really important to understand what is and isn't actually happening out there already. As we start rolling out policies like the ones we've passed today, and these schools start implementing them, how's it going, right? Like that is very important intelligence to hear. And of course, we distill this information down as staff, but it's so critical to hear firsthand. And expert review teams over time in the blueprint, these are meant to be a permanent fixture within the blueprint into perpetuity. And really a key function for the CTE committee long term is to run these expert review teams. And one of the purposes of that, and it's referenced in our apprenticeship policy, so I also wanted to make sure to highlight it here, is that expert review teams have, under the blueprint law, the authority to kind of issue recommendations to the Accountability and Implementation Board around that percentage of LEA funding that they can opt to withhold from an LEA. We have the opportunity with our expert review teams to say, if we see something that we're very concerned about, to make that recommendation. And so I think John's, really kind of walked through some of the activities the expert review teams, as designed right now, will undertake, but that is obviously a very serious recommendation to make. And so I also wanted to highlight, just as referenced in our policy, the fact that, as John indicated, these first couple of visits, gathering a lot of information, setting a baseline, and really looking to technical assistance, right? Like, what support do you need to be able to implement these policies before taking a measure like that? But that is, of course, a very serious responsibility for these expert review teams long term. So even though this is going to be our first year of full deployment, we're not necessarily going there in year one. I did just want to highlight that because it underscores just this work is so important that John's leading for our team, and we'll really value your participation in it.
Thank you. Next slide.
Oh, yeah.
Sorry,
Yeah,
you're the
did say that,
clicker.
didn't you? There you go.
Thanks. Just briefly, this is what will be asked of a team member, just so you're aware, just so you have that in your mind. We have a full day at an LEA, and this is also the plan right now. After the first visit, this could change. This is something that can change. This is not in stone, but this is something that we're planning on. A day at an LEA, 8 to 3:30, that's not too bad. That's kind of what we're planning on. A virtual orientation before the visit, that's for all of us to gather information about each other, introduce ourselves to each other, but also the LEA comes too. And they also will give background on themselves. Maybe part of that would be, what do they want us to focus on while we are there too? This is what we've noticed. This is what we think would be important if you guys had extra eyes on that. Participate in activities during that, classroom visits, be active participant in that, our focus group interviews, taking really good notes, because I've learned that that's super important. Compile those notes afterwards into a document, trying to figure out what are the strengths that you saw, what are the challenges that they're running into, and then some recommendations that you might have. Then we'll get back together for a virtual debrief and look at those notes and figure out how we compile those into a report. And then us as the staff take that information and turn that into a report to then send out to the LEAs and eventually make it public. I think that's the plan. Molly knows that better than me. Yes, that's required. Next, sorry.
Oh, and John, I don't know if you just wanted to give everyone an update real quick on
That's the last one.
we have, so as you all know, you approved the expert review team deployment plan at our June virtual meeting. And so at this point, we have not received any feedback from the AIB or approval on that plan yet. So we are moving forward because we do need to have these visits and so forth scheduled because it takes a lot of planning to work with the LEAs to make these happen. And so John, I don't know if you wanted to speak to that at all. I do think the feedback and approval will be coming soon, but I don't know if we have a recent update.
I don't have one. Nothing recent on that. I will say that we are starting, our first two visits are going to be to Caroline County and to Worcester County. We're already planning those, and I'm recruiting people for those right now. Taught at the local community college down there and the local workforce board down there too. super exciting. What you can look for in the next week is I'm going to be sending out an email to you guys with a Google form that you can go through and you can say, yes, I'm interested in being part of this. No, I'm not, but my designee will, or both of us will be there. And then the dates and where we're going will be on there too, and you can check off, yes, this is where I want to go, this is where I'm interested in going, and then I'll follow up with you. And we can even meet one-on-one just so you can we can talk through what that would look like, and then we'll get you on that schedule and we can get you there too. Okay?
Thank you, John.
Yeah.
I promise I'm up for
I
going
know.
to
I know you are.
as many as I can.
I know you are.
Yeah.
Okay. Great.
All right, thank you. Any questions or comments or anything on this for John before we move to our next item? Otherwise, we'll look forward to seeing you all on visits at some point this year. All right.
John, just one
Rob.
quick
Oh, yeah.
question, I'm sorry.
Yes, sir.
So we have the dates lined out November through May. Have you set dates besides one visit in May so that we can look at our schedules to try to? Is that
That's
gonna come in that
what's
form?
coming. Yes, the reason that I haven't sent it all yet because I sent individual emails to all of the LEAs that we're going to this year, so they don't see a mass email to everybody and go, why did I just find out that I'm getting one? So that's what it started with. I'm waiting for like 2 more to confirm back to me that that date's good, and then I was going to let you guys know so you would know. I just didn't want to throw that out there to people and mess them up.
That's perfect, thank you.
Yeah, no problem.
Awesome, thank you.
Thanks.
Okay, good. The next item will be, okay. The next item will be fairly quick, but something we did just want to elevate for the committee's awareness now, because we next meet again in November, and there'll be some work happening between now and then. I think many of you and our viewers are somewhat familiar with the career counseling program established under the Blueprint. This is a huge, revolutionary, first of its kind program to deploy career counselors to every public middle and high school in the state. And it's done in partnership. This is also a unique element of the Blueprint. It's done in partnership with local workforce development boards, LEAs, and community colleges. It started being implemented last year. The AIB has really, and still maintains kind of full oversight and jurisdiction over the program. And I think there's been interest among our members in understanding what's happening with the program. How can we be more supportive? How can we ensure it's going forward on the right track and that career counselors are getting the support they need, that there's good training? And from among our local stakeholders, we've also been hearing a lot of feedback around the fact that they got started last year, honestly, without necessarily having a ton of really clear guidance, without necessarily having definitions provided from any state entity around what is career counseling, how are we defining certain activities, what are the expectations for different grade levels moving through career counseling, and what metrics are we expected to be measuring and tracking ourselves on so that we know how we're making progress to support the state's goals. And so over the course of the last few months, we've had, at a staff level, quite a few conversations with our local partners and with the Accountability and Implementation Board. And so over the coming months, this committee has an opportunity to take on more of a role in partnering with the AIB to sort of just really kind of be leading the charge to develop guidance and definitions. Again, everything gets approved by the AIB, of course, but to really kind of start charting that course. And so that's work we're going to be undertaking really starting as soon as possible. We will be looking to also bring in external resources to support us in that work on an ongoing basis, given the lean staffing. We'll talk about staffing here in a minute, actually, because we have some updates. But we wanted to kind of point out first that we have an opportunity to step more into this space. Wanted committee members to have that on your radar, because we'll be asking you to weigh in and to participate in this process. And also to really just highlight some of the first things we'll need to be working on. Going into year 2, there's still not a consistent set of metrics that the state's asking for. So that's priority 1. I mentioned definitions, pretty critical as well, to make sure folks know when you say measure individualized career coaching, for example, what does individualized career coaching, what counts? So those are the two, those kind of pieces work together, and we're going to be working on those in short order here in the next few months. Recognizing timelines are far from perfect, far from ideal, but this is the timeline we're given and the timeline we're starting with, so I'm really eager to dive into it and work with a lot of you along the way. Any comments or questions?
It takes time to establish a career counseling system like that.
It does.
But I think, there are models,
Yes.
certainly technology, documentation, how many students are seen and what are they doing, follow-ups.
Absolutely.
It's too early, but I think we should be thinking about those things.
Absolutely, thank you. That's a great point. And I actually, on that note, I meant to also really commend many of our LEAs and community colleges and local boards out there across the state, if you're watching, who have already been starting this work. As we embark on getting a little more involved in this alongside the AIB, we absolutely intend to be learning from what you've already been doing, things that are already working. We have great models across the country, different school systems right here within our state, and especially here within our state that we can be drawing from as we think about this. Secretary Wu.
Thank you, Rachel. And I do think, from what I've heard anecdotally from individuals, schools, and districts is, people are not sure, like, the sort of what target are we aiming at here, right? You know, there are many different ways to measure success. There's a lot. We know that, especially for educators who have a lot on their plate and students have very full schedules, like, how can we make sure we have the most effective engagement? And then, of course, tie it to, because there's a little bit of parallel tracking. We're asking these counselors to do this. At the same time, we're changing all these rules and setting up, new guidelines on industry recognized credentials, different programs, things like that, making sure at apprenticeship that, the two sides understand what each are up to. Yeah. So there's a lot to be done here, and look forward to partnering with Dr. Wright and her team on this.
There are excellent models within the state of Maryland. We often want to look outside, and I see this all the time. But let's look within the states. There are really exceptional models right here.
For sure, thank you. Good. Okay, well, there's certainly more to come on this, but we did, like I said, want to have this on the radar because you'll be hearing about this, in between now and the next meeting.
Actually, I just realized I had a question.
Yes.
Is this, I know there's the expert review team, and they have a couple required focuses under the blueprint. Is talking, and I know the focus groups, you had some with the career counselors before, but is sort of getting a slightly deeper dive on that also part of the review? Yes.
Yes, and those are some of the questions that we're asking, but I guess that can be a question back to you too. Like, what are some of those things that you would like to see from this that you want us to ask and to get out of these, and so we can report out on that? So those are good questions too. Like, what I would like to know now that we've done one is I would like to know X, Y, and Z, so we can see that in some sort of report. Yeah.
Great. Okay, thank you. All right, we're going to shift gears a little bit, getting kind of to sort of the last leg of our meeting here today. Wanted to sort of provide some updates to the committee around budget. Since our last meeting, we just have some new information that we're able to share around budget and around staffing. So I wanted to sort of just reiterate here briefly, we did share with those board members who were able to attend our Governor's Workforce Board meeting in June. We shared with the full board our overall budget, breaking out kind of general board from CTE committee, sort of budget areas, and kind of looked at what our staffing structure looks like. Our CTE committee budget did fortunately add staff positions, which you heard John talk about, quite a lot of work. Molly and I, and all of us here talking in our apprenticeship policy, next steps ahead. So those additional positions will be critical, and we'll talk about that here in a minute. So I just kind of want to put this back up in front of the group and then share some staffing updates. And for that, I will start by turning it over to Molly Mesdard.
All right, thank you so much, Rachel. So I just wanted to speak with you all today and all of those tuning in to just let you know that my role is going to be transitioning a little bit in the upcoming month. So as most of you know, I have 2 young boys at home, and most of you were with me through both maternity leaves, so, but so I've been, thinking for a long time about, wanting to spend more time with them, but still being involved in the workforce. And so, I've been working with Rachel on developing a ability for me to be a part-time contractual senior advisor to the CTE committee to really support our work here and continue that, but also get to spend some more time with my family. And so, as you will see on the next slide, we will be looking for a senior director to replace me, because my role is not part-time. It is very busy, but I'm really, really excited to support the CTE committee. There is going to be a lot going on behind the scenes, a lot of staffing and onboarding and work to be developed. And so I'm really looking forward to continuing that work. But as I said, kind of getting that a little more time with my boys. So I want to thank you all, and I'm really excited about that. And as I said, pretty much continuing in my full-time capacity for the next month, and then likely in October going down to part-time. And I'll turn it over to Rachel to talk about our upcoming staffing.
I have to jump in here first. I just want to say on behalf of the entire committee and everyone who has interfaced with this work, incredible gratitude to you. You've done, I'm new to this work. You have gone through major transitions here. You have, new administration coming in, new orientation, and just handled everything with real aplomb. It's been a great honor to work with you, and I'm so thankful that you are doing what is best for you and your family, and that you're able to continue to work with us on this, because we need you. And so just really want to express deep gratitude.
Thank you so much. Really appreciate that.
And I will just add, personally, I'm not sure I would have made it through my first year, which I just cleared, if it were not for Molly, who got me up to speed on everything here really quickly, and just has been instrumental to moving everything forward. So I'm so thrilled that you're able to stay on the team. And as Molly did mention, we wanted to take this opportunity to share this news sort of openly and publicly, because we will essentially immediately be starting a search for a few new positions, including a senior director for the CTE committee. This will be a senior leadership role reporting directly to me, so you kind of see here kind of the sort of official workforce board org chart and some staffing underneath of that. And of course, this individual would work very closely with Chair Norton of this committee, in addition to at a staff level reporting to me. And like I said, really being part of our senior leadership team for this committee. This is a really, I think, incredible opportunity to be part of charting a vision forward, really accelerating implementation of the work that we've been talking about here today and over the recent months. So we welcome candidates from, background. We were really looking, I should add, for, candidates with expertise in some of the areas that we're talking about, experience and really big ideas. So with that being said, we welcome anyone who's interested to reach out. We will, of course, also be opening an application process, and welcome our committee members to provide us with recommendations if you know of anyone fantastic who you think could be a really great fit for this role. We will also be, in the next few months, working to quickly hire some of those additional positions, new positions I mentioned. So a program manager to really support ongoing project management on a number of fronts, with John continuing to really lead the charge on that expert review team work. That in and of itself, as you just heard, is such a large body of work. So John will be dedicated to that, with our program manager supporting some of our other ongoing projects and policy development. And we'll then be looking to hire a policy analyst, as well as a research and data analyst, kind of calling back to some of the other needs we were talking about earlier, to support so much of this work we've been talking about today. So wanted to just share that so everyone kind of is on notice. Stay tuned. We're really excited to hire some fantastic experts for these roles. So, and again, any questions, please reach out to me, Myra, Molly, any of us, if you have questions or you're interested or know someone who might be. Any questions or comments on kind of just our staff expansion and our staffing future? Well, I'm really excited to see the team growing to support this work. So I will do the rah-rah, but I'm thrilled. And again, really grateful to Molly for everything that you've done in all your leadership. All right.
Okay. I'm just going to underscore, please, if you know anyone who would be good for these we have a lot of work to do. We need many hands to do it. So please reach out. I think we got a lot done today. I feel pretty good about this. So thank you all for, not just for today, but for leaning in on these important things in between these meetings. I am personally grateful, and I feel like we're really getting into the meat of things now. So again, just a reminder, the Governor's Workforce Development Board meeting September 18th, 4 p.m. at Anne Arundel Medical Center. Please be there if you can. We're really going to have this conversation about employer recruitment strategy, and I think it's important for us to hear that and be a partner in that conversation. And then our next CTE committee public meeting is in November at Harford County Public Schools, so more information to come on that. Anything anyone needs to discuss before we adjourn? Can I have a motion to adjourn? All in favor? Aye. Any opposed?
Aye.
Okay. We are adjourned. Thank you all.